The year was 1347, and the morning mist clung to the stone walls of Ravenscroft Castle like a shroud. Sir Edmund de Montfort adjusted his chainmail as he prepared for another day of training in the courtyard, but his thoughts were not on swordplay or his duties to Lord Aldrich. Instead, they wandered to the woman who had captured his heart 3 years prior, Lady Isabelle de Clare. She had arrived at court as a ward of the king, her father having died in service to the crown. At 17, she possessed a beauty that made even the most hardened knights pause in their conversations. Her auburn hair caught the light like burnished copper, and her green eyes held an intelligence that few women of her station were permitted to display. Edmund, then 25 and already established as one of Lord Aldrich's most trusted knights, had been tasked with ensuring her safety during her stay at Ravenscroft. What began as duty had blossomed into something far more dangerous. Their first conversation had occurred in the castle's herb garden, where Isabelle tended to the medicinal plants under the guidance of the castle's healer. Edmund had found her there, carefully grinding feverfew into powder for the treatment of headaches that plagued the servants. "You have gentle hands for such work, my lady," he had observed, removing his helm as courtesy demanded. She had looked up at him with those remarkable eyes, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "And you have kind words for a man trained in warfare, Sir Edmund." From that moment, an understanding had grown between them. In the evenings, after the great hall had emptied of its revellers and the lord had retired to his chambers, they would meet in the castle's chapel. There, under the watchful gaze of carved saints, they would speak of poetry, philosophy, and dreams that neither dared voice in daylight. Edmund knew the impossibility of their situation. He was a knight in service, bound by oaths of loyalty, and possessed of lands that, while respectable, could never match the dowry and political alliance that Isabelle's marriage would command. She was destined for nobility far above his station. Yet in those stolen moments, such realities seemed as distant as the Holy Land. Their relationship had deepened slowly, built on shared glances across the great hall during feasts, brief touches when he helped her from her palfrey after rides through the countryside, and conversations that grew ever more intimate. By the end of her first year at Ravenscroft, they had become lovers in all but the final sense, their kisses stolen in shadowed alcoves and their hands finding each other during prayers. It was in her second year that they had finally succumbed completely to their desire. During the Feast of Pentecost, when the castle overflowed with visitors and the normal routines were disrupted, Edmund had found Isabelle alone in the tower room that served as her chamber. The spring rain drummed against the shuttered windows, and candlelight flickered across her face as she sat at her small writing desk, composing a letter to her cousin in France. "I should not be here," he had whispered. Yet he made no move to leave. "No," she had agreed, rising to face him. "You should not." But they were young, and love made them reckless. That night, as the rain continued its steady rhythm, they had given themselves to each other completely. In the months that followed, they managed to steal away together whenever opportunity allowed, always careful, always discreet, but always yearning for more than these brief encounters could provide. Now, as Edmund stood in the courtyard watching the squires practice their sword work, he could not shake the feeling that change was coming. Messengers had arrived from the royal court the previous evening, and Lord Aldrich had spent long hours in conference with his advisers. The political winds were shifting, and Isabelle, as a ward of the king, would inevitably be swept along with them. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew his attention to the castle gates, where a small party of riders emerged from the morning mist. At their head rode a herald bearing the royal standard, his surcoat brilliant with the lions of England. Behind him came a knight Edmund recognised as Sir Geoffrey de Warwick, a man known for his influence at court and his skill in matters of diplomacy. As the party drew closer, Edmund felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. He had seen such arrivals before, and they rarely brought good news for those who hoped to remain unchanged by the machinations of kings and nobles. The great hall of Ravenscroft Castle had never felt so oppressive to Edmund as it did that evening. Lord Aldrich sat in his carved oak chair at the head of the long table, his weathered face grave as he addressed the assembled household. Sir Geoffrey de Warwick stood beside him, still bearing the dust of travel on his fine woolen cloak, his message delivered, but its implications still settling like stones in still water. His Majesty King Edward has seen fit to recall Lady Isabelle de Clare to court, Lord Aldrich announced, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. She is to be married to King Philip of France as part of the treaty negotiations to end the current hostilities. Edmund felt the blood drain from his face, though he maintained the stoic expression expected of a knight. Around the hall, murmurs rippled through the assembled servants and men-at-arms. Such a marriage was not unexpected. Royal wards were valuable pieces in the great game of politics, but the speed of the arrangement caught everyone unprepared. Isabel sat at the high table, her face pale but composed. She had learned well the art of concealing her emotions, a skill necessary for any woman of noble birth. Her hands rested folded in her lap, but Edmund could see the slight tremor that betrayed her inner turmoil. Their eyes met for the briefest moment across the hall, and in that glance he saw a lifetime of unspoken farewells. Sir Geoffrey stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of royal command. Lady Isabel is to depart for Westminster within the fortnight, where she will be prepared for her journey to France. The marriage is to take place at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris before the Feast of All Saints. The timeline struck Edmund like a physical blow. 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, the woman he loved would be bound forever to a king he had never met, sealed away in a foreign court where their paths would never cross again. The practical part of his mind, trained by years of military service, began calculating distances and possibilities, but he knew such thoughts were folly. After the formal announcement concluded and the household began to disperse, Edmund made his way to the castle's armory, seeking solitude among the familiar weight of steel and leather. He had barely closed the heavy wooden door behind him when soft footsteps announced another's presence. "I wondered if I might find you here." Isabel's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the close confines of the armory, it seemed to fill every corner. He turned to face her, drinking in the sight of her features in the flickering torchlight. Soon this would be only memory. "You should not be here, my lady. If anyone were to discover, let them discover," she said with sudden fierceness, stepping closer until he could smell the lavender oil she used in her hair. "What more can they do to us now? I am already lost to you." Edmund reached out instinctively, his calloused hands cupping her face with the gentleness he reserved only for her. "You are not lost. You go to be a queen, to secure peace between our realms. Your father would be proud of the service you do for England." Tears gathered in her green eyes, though she fought to keep them from falling. "My father is dead, Edmund. He cannot be proud or disappointed, and I do not wish to be a queen if it means I cannot be with you." The words hung between them like a challenge to fate itself. They both knew the impossibility of what she suggested, yet in this moment, surrounded by the tools of war, peace seemed equally impossible. "We have perhaps 10 days before the court preparations begin in earnest," she continued, her voice growing steadier. 10 days before I must become someone else entirely, a diplomatic offering, a symbol of alliance, rather than a woman with her own heart. Edmund pulled her against his chest, feeling her warmth through the fine wool of her gown. "What would you have me do, beloved? Command me, and I will attempt it, hopeless though it may be." She was quiet for a long moment, and he could feel her mind working, weighing possibilities against impossibilities. Finally, she pulled back to look into his eyes. "Love me," she said simply. "For these remaining days, forget duty and politics and the future that awaits. Love me as if we were free to choose our own path." It was a dangerous request, one that could lead to accusations of treason if their relationship were discovered. Yet as Edmund looked down at the woman who had claimed his heart so completely, he found himself nodding. "Then we must be careful," he said, "more careful than we have ever been before." Outside the armory, the castle continued its evening routines, unaware that in the shadows among the weapons of war, two hearts were making their own desperate plans for a love that had no future beyond the turning of autumn leaves. The following week passed like a fever dream for Edmund and Isabel. They had become masters of deception, meeting in places where their presence could be explained by duty or coincidence. The castle's daily routines provided cover for their desperate courtship. Edmund escorting her to the chapel for morning prayers, both of them lingering after the others had departed to steal moments among the carved stone saints. On the 3rd day after the announcement, they managed to slip away during the afternoon hunt, while Lord Aldrich and his guests pursued deer through the forest. Edmund claimed the need to check the castle's outer defences, and Isabelle expressed a desire to gather herbs for the castle's healer. They met at the old mill that stood beside the stream, its water wheel turning lazily in the autumn current. In France, they will expect me to speak their tongue perfectly, Isabelle said, as they sat beside the water, her voice carrying a forced lightness. They will teach me their customs, their preferences in food and music and prayer. By the time of my wedding, I will be more French than English. Edmund picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the stream's surface, watching it dance 3 times before sinking. You could never be anything but yourself. No matter what language you speak or what crown you wear, she turned to study his profile, memorizing the strong line of his jaw and the way his dark hair caught the filtered sunlight. Will you remember me as I am now? When you hear tales of the French Queen, will you think of the girl who helped you tend your wounded destrier last spring? The memory brought a smile to his face, despite their circumstances. His warhorse had stepped wrong during training, and Isabelle had appeared with strips of linen and a bottle of wine to clean the wound. She had worked with steady hands while the great beast snorted and stamped, showing no fear of the animal that could easily crush her. I will remember everything, he promised, turning to face her fully. The way you hum while working in the garden, how you always pause to pet the castle cats, even when you are dressed in your finest gowns, the face you make when you disagree with something but are too polite to argue. She laughed, a sound like silver bells that he wished he could capture and keep forever. And what face is that? This one, he said, leaning forward to kiss the small furrow that appeared between her brows when she was thinking. The simple gesture led to deeper kisses, and for a while, they could forget everything beyond the warmth of each other's touch. Their most daring meeting came on the 6th day, when Isabelle claimed a headache and retired to her chamber early. Edmund waited until the castle settled into sleep before making his way through passages he had memorized during his years of service. The tower stairs were treacherous in the darkness, but he navigated them with the skill of a man who had scaled castle walls in wartime. Isabelle waited for him behind her chamber door, dressed in a simple linen shift with her hair loose around her shoulders. The sight of her, so different from the composed lady of the court, nearly undid his resolve to be cautious. The servants will not check on me until morning, she whispered, drawing him into the small chamber lit only by a single candle. Tonight we can pretend we are simply Edmund and Isabelle, with no titles or duties to divide us. They made love with a desperate tenderness, as if they could somehow preserve this moment against the inevitable march of time. Afterward, they lay entwined on her narrow bed, speaking in whispers of impossible dreams. If we were common folk, Isabelle murmured against his chest, what would our life be like? Edmund's hand traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder as he considered the question. We would have a small house, perhaps near the village. You would tend a garden and sell herbs at market. I would work the land, or maybe serve as a man-at-arms for the local lord. Would we have children? The question caught in his throat. Yes, he said finally. Sons with your intelligence and daughters with your courage. She was quiet for so long that he thought she had fallen asleep, but then she spoke again, her voice thick with unshed tears. I have been thinking about running away. Edmund stiffened, fully alert now. Isabelle, you cannot speak of such things. The consequences— I know the consequences, she interrupted. I would be branded a traitor to the crown. You would be executed for abducting a royal ward. Our families would suffer for our choices. But Edmund, I cannot bear the thought of belonging to a man I have never met, of bearing children who will never know their mother's heart because it belongs to someone else. He held her tighter, feeling the tremor in her voice that spoke of real consideration rather than idle fantasy. Where would we go? There is nowhere in England we could hide, and crossing to the continent would only bring us closer to your betrothed. Scotland, she whispered, the borderlands where English law grows thin. We could find passage to Ireland or even further. For a moment, Edmund allowed himself to imagine it, the two of them riding north through autumn forests, leaving behind everything they had ever known for the chance to build a life together. But reality reasserted itself like a cold wind. They would hunt us until we were found, and when we were captured, your death would be as certain as mine. I will not be the cause of your destruction, beloved. I would rather lose you to a crown than to an executioner's blade. She wept then, quietly but deeply, and Edmund held her until the tears were spent. Outside her window, the first hints of dawn touched the sky, and he knew he had to leave. As he dressed in the pale light, Isabel spoke once more. 3 more days until I depart for Westminster. Promise me we will make them count. Edmund paused in lacing his tunic, meeting her eyes in the growing light. I promise, he said, and sealed the vow with a kiss that tasted of salt and sorrow. The morning of Isabel's departure dawned grey and cold, with a bitter wind that stripped the last leaves from the oak trees surrounding Ravenscroft Castle. Edmund stood at his post in the courtyard, his face a mask of professional duty as he watched the servants load the final chests onto the waiting wagons. The royal escort had arrived at first light, 20 mounted men-at-arms led by Sir Geoffrey de Warwick, their horses stamping impatiently in the crisp air. Isabel emerged from the great hall dressed in travelling clothes befitting her station. A deep blue woolen gown trimmed with ermine, a heavy cloak lined with fur, and a circlet of silver that marked her status as a ward of the crown. She moved with the practised grace of nobility, her face composed and distant, but Edmund caught the slight tremor in her hands as she pulled on her leather gloves. Lord Aldrich stood beside the mounting block, offering formal words of farewell that carried the weight of diplomatic necessity. Lady Isabel, you go forth to serve England with honour. May God grant you a safe journey and a blessed union. She curtsied with perfect form, her voice steady as she replied, My lord, I am grateful for the hospitality you have shown me these past 3 years. I shall carry fond memories of Ravenscroft with me always. Edmund's heart clenched at her words. Only he understood the true meaning behind her careful phrasing, that she would indeed carry their memories with her into whatever future awaited in the French court. He watched as she moved through the ritual of leave-taking, accepting blessings from the castle's chaplain, and embracing the ladies who had served as her companions. When protocol demanded that the captain of the guard inspect the security arrangements one final time, Edmund found himself face to face with Isabel beside her waiting palfrey. The mare was a gentle creature, chosen specifically for long journeys, her coat the colour of burnished copper, not unlike Isabel's hair. Sir Edmund, she said formally, extending her hand for his assistance in mounting, I thank you for your diligent service in ensuring my safety during my time here. He took her hand, feeling the slight pressure of her fingers against his palm, a touch that spoke volumes while revealing nothing to the watching crowd. It has been my honour, my lady, he replied, his voice perfectly controlled despite the chaos in his chest. As he helped her into the side saddle, she leaned close enough that only he could hear her whispered words. The chapel. Tonight. After Compline. Before he could respond, she had settled herself and taken up the reins, transforming once again into the composed noblewoman preparing for a royal journey. Sir Geoffrey mounted his destrier and gave the signal to depart, and the procession began to move toward the castle gates. Edmund remained at attention as the column passed, each hoofbeat taking Isabel further from his reach. She did not look back. Such behaviour would have been unseemly for a lady of her station, but he saw her shoulders straighten as if steeling, herself against the pain of departure. The hours that followed passed in a haze of mechanical duty. Edmund supervised the evening patrols, checked the watch schedules, and attended to the 100 small tasks that kept a castle functioning, but his mind remained fixed on Isabel's whispered words. After Compline, the final prayer service of the day, she wanted to meet in the chapel, but she was already miles away, travelling toward her destiny as Queen of France. As the sun set behind the western hills, Edmund made his way to the chapel as if drawn by invisible threads. The small stone building was empty, except for the flickering candles on the altar and the shadows cast by carved pillars. He knelt before the crucifix, not in prayer, but in a kind of desperate hope that somehow his understanding had been wrong. The soft sound of footsteps on stone made him turn, and his heart nearly stopped. A figure in a dark hooded cloak stood in the doorway, and as she pushed back the hood, Isabel's face emerged from the shadows. How? Was all he could manage to say. She moved quickly to his side, her voice urgent and low. I claimed sudden illness just beyond the village. Sir Geoffrey was forced to return me to the castle until I recover enough to travel safely. I have perhaps 2 days before they insist on continuing, illness or no illness. Edmund rose to his feet, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. The risk you have taken, if they suspect deception, they will not suspect, she said with a confidence born of desperation. I have been practicing the symptoms of fever since yesterday. The castle's healer has confirmed my condition and recommended rest. She stepped closer, her hands finding his in the candlelit dimness. Edmund, I could not leave without saying goodbye properly. That formal farewell in the courtyard, it was not enough. It could never be enough for what we have shared. He pulled her into his arms, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his chest. For 3 years, she had been the center of his private world, and now she was asking him to let her go forever, with nothing but stolen moments to sustain him through the decades ahead. 2 days, he said, the words both a promise and a lament. 2 days, she agreed, and then I must become someone else entirely. But tonight and tomorrow night I am still yours. Outside the chapel, the wind howled through the castle walls like a voice mourning something irretrievably lost. But within the sacred space, 2 hearts beat in rhythm with a love that would have to last a lifetime. 10 years had passed since Isabelle de Clare had left Ravenscroft Castle to become Queen of France, and Edmund de Montfort had aged beyond his years. The knight, who had once been considered one of the finest warriors, in Lord Aldrich's service now carried himself with the weight of a man, haunted by choices unmade and words unspoken. The great hall where he sat nursing a cup of wine bore witness to the changes time had wrought. Lord Aldrich had died 3 winters past, and his son ruled now with less wisdom and more ambition than his father. New tapestries hung on the walls, depicting battles Edmund no longer cared to remember, and younger knights filled the benches where his contemporaries had once sat. The messenger who had arrived that morning still stood before the high table, his travel-stained cloak marking him as one who had ridden hard from distant lands. His news had struck the assembled court like thunder from a clear sky. Queen Isabelle of France was dead, taken by a fever that had swept through Paris during the harsh winter months. She bore 3 sons to King Philip, the messenger continued, his voice echoing in the suddenly quiet hall. The eldest is now heir to the French throne. The Queen was much beloved by her subjects, known for her charitable works and her wisdom in matters of state. Edmund's cup trembled in his hands as he absorbed the words. Isabelle, his Isabelle, reduced to a list of accomplishments and surviving children. The woman who had laughed like silver bells and wept in his arms over impossible dreams was now simply a diplomatic footnote. Her life measured in treaties signed and alliances secured. After the court dispersed, Edmund found himself walking the familiar paths of his youth, ending inevitably in the castle's chapel. The carved saints looked down with the same stone expressions they had worn 20 years ago, when he and Isabelle had stolen moments among the flickering candles. Now those moments felt like scenes from someone else's life. Brother Marcus, the elderly monk who served as the castle's chaplain, found him there as the evening shadows lengthened. The old man's footsteps were soft on the stone floor as he approached the kneeling knight. "You knew her well, didn't you?" the monk asked gently, settling himself on a nearby bench with the careful movements of advanced age. Edmund looked up from his clasped hands, his face showing every one of his 43 years. "I was charged with her protection during her time here. It was my duty to know her well." Brother Marcus studied him with eyes that had seen too much of human nature to be fooled by careful words. "And yet you never married, Sir Edmund. In all these years no lady has caught your fancy." The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with unspoken understanding. Edmund had indeed remained unmarried, despite several advantageous matches proposed by his lords over the years. He had claimed devotion to his duties, dedication to his service, but the truth was simpler and more devastating. No woman could compete with a ghost. "I loved someone once," Edmund said finally, the admission drawn from him like blood from a wound, "but she was beyond my reach, destined for greater things than a knight's modest holdings could provide. And now? Now she is dead, and I am left with nothing but regret for the coward I proved to be." The monk's eyebrows rose slightly. "Coward? You, who have distinguished yourself in 3 campaigns and earned the respect of every lord you have served." Edmund rose from his knees, pacing to the altar where candles cast dancing shadows on the carved crucifix. "When she came to me that last night before her final departure, she begged me to run away with her. She would have given up her title, her position, everything, for a chance at happiness with me. And I refused her." The words tasted like ashes in his mouth. For 10 years, he had told himself that he had made the honourable choice, that protecting her from the consequences of such a reckless act had been the right decision. But now, with news of her death echoing in his mind, Honour seemed a cold comfort indeed. I told her that duty mattered more than love, he continued, his voice growing rougher with emotion. I convinced her that her marriage to the French king would serve a greater purpose than our private happiness. I watched her ride away to a life of state functions and political necessities because I was too afraid to risk everything for the woman I claimed to love. Brother Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers working the wooden beads of his rosary. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years spent counseling troubled souls. And if you had run? If you had taken her away from her duties and obligations? What then? Then she might have lived, Edmund said fiercely. She might have had a simple life, perhaps children who knew their mother's laughter instead of her diplomatic skills. She might have grown old beside someone who treasured her for herself, not for the alliances her marriage could secure. Or, the monk said gently, you might both have been captured within a fortnight. She might have faced execution as a traitor, and you alongside her. The children she bore to the French king might never have existed. The charitable works that earned her subjects' love might never have been accomplished. The peace her marriage helped secure might have crumbled into war. Edmund turned from the altar, his face twisted with anguish. Do you think I have not told myself these things 1,000 times? Do you think I have not tried to find comfort in the thought that her sacrifice served some greater good? And yet you are here, mourning not just her death, but the life you might have shared. The simple observation cut deeper than any blade. Edmund sank back onto the bench beside the monk, suddenly feeling older than his years. I dream of her sometimes, he admitted. In my dreams, we are in that cottage I once described to her, with children playing in a garden and no duties beyond the ones we choose for ourselves. And when I wake, I remember that I am the one who chose duty over love, honour over happiness. I am the one who sent her away. Brother Marcus placed a weathered hand on Edmund's shoulder. Perhaps, Sir Edmund, the time has come to forgive yourself for being human. Love and duty need not always be enemies, but when they are, there is no choice that does not carry a price. You paid yours in loneliness and regret. She paid hers in a different way. As the chapel bells began to toll vespers, Edmund remained in the gathering darkness, surrounded by memories of a love that had shaped his life even in its absence. Somewhere in France, a queen lay cold in her tomb, and a knight in an English castle finally began to weep for all the might-have-beens that would haunt him until his own dying day. The candles flickered lower, casting ever longer shadows on the stone walls. But Edmund did not move. He had spent 10 years running from his grief, and now it had finally caught him.